Now, this is where this curve came from. Just going to give you a little bit of history. The first time I actually became aware of that curve was a book called Understanding Organizational Change, Converting Theory to Practice, Lynn Fossum, and it was about late 80s, something like that, early 90s. And she said, you're at a plateau, you want to get to another plateau, but before you get there, you'll go through a valley of despair. Valley of despair is what she called that. Now, I like that valley of despair when we're talking about changes that people don't want to happen, because you actually go through despair, but that's a small part of change. Okay, because some people really want the change to happen, but you're still going to go through the dip. Can't call it valley of despair. What do you call it? There's a lot of work going on that, and I think it's probably more of a cocoon stage to a metamorphosis, type situation than a valley of despair. And although the valley of despair does exist, some places it's just not always there. Now, this is another article that really influenced me a lot, and it says work output and commitment to a project will take a big dip, and they say it happens 4 months before you even cancel a project. And it goes down to 50% of your 100%. And this would be, for example, you're going to the company you work at, and then you're going to make this major change, and it's going to negatively affect people. They're going to lose something dear to them. Maybe their project they're working on, or whatever that situation is. This says that as soon as they find out it's going to happen, it just messes with them. It lowers their motivation, their output, commitment, and it takes them a year, if they like this, to get back up to 80% of where they were. And I thought, that was really a cool study the guy did. Now, we just took those ideas and we said, well, here's kind of what we think. We think that we stretch it out a little bit, and we say, well, we're going to try to work on, see what it takes to minimize that dip, and we're going to call that cocoon stage. So we wrote that in 92. Now, one thing about it, you can tell the older the study is by how squared off it is. That's before they have software that curves well, and you have to draw curves back then. Now you can create them using software. Okay, so that's the 90s, right? The olden days. Now this is another curve that's interesting. So let's talk about the S-curve. Anybody ever heard of an S-curve? S-curve is kind of a technology curve. In the olden days, if you had the buggy whips in the early Egyptian time, it took a long time, and by the time the 1800s were here in the 1900s, you still had basically the same buggy whip. That makes sense? If you had, for example, this is one example somebody gave me I thought was really good. Do you know why our cars are as wide as they are wide? Do you have that story? Do you know some of that story? Tell some of that.
Roman chariots.
Yeah, it started off, Roman chariots left grooves. It left wagon ruts. Okay? Every wagon that came along after that had to fit in those ruts or it'd tear them apart. And the chariots were the distance that 2 horses could be lined up. So all of that made sense, right? And so the next wagons were basically two horses wide, and you didn't change it. And then when it came to pave over that, you basically have 2 horses wide chariot with paved road, which turned out to be car had to fit there. Okay, so the way everything that happens today is a product of history. And so that's a system thought. And we have organizations like that. Well, we used to do it this way because we used to do it manually. Now, can you imagine going to automated systems, computer systems? Well, we're using the same manual system. We just automated the manual system for a long time. Now we're getting S-shaped curve is really a technology curve. Talks about technology, and then in the late 80s or late 90s, long after the stuff, the U.S. Department of Energy had on their website, that's what a curve looked like, right? They just smoothed it all out. So Department of Labor says that happens. Now, also you know that it's right when Microsoft says it happens, right? So Microsoft on their website, 2001. The only reason I'm showing you this, just to give it credibility. 2001, that the change curve exists, and if you introduce change, and they had introduction here, I think you actually introduce it before it starts dipping, before you introduce it officially, which is the thought of change, the introduction. But if you start making change, I'm assuming that's what they mean, making the change. And they also said that you can minimize the dip by using organizational change models or organizational change methods. So doesn't that kind of look something like that? Okay, so it kind of sounds like it has credibility. So now we're back at this. Kind of looks like that, right? And so now let's think about what types of change do we have? And I was just thinking, this is kind of me brainstorming with myself. So I said to myself, self. That's what change looks like to me, and I agreed with myself. So that's where that came from. You either just pretend like we're going through a change. So the one scenario is you make change happen, right? So hopefully it's positive. It's a positive change. You want it to happen, right? Maybe steps change due to impulse. Maybe you're just impulsive and you make a change, right? So it may not be well thought out. It may just be, hey, I like that color. Let's buy all our computers in that color, or something like that. And the other thing is, it could be steps change due to innovation, where you come out with a new product and you're actually putting a lot of thought into it, but you're going a little step at a time, right? And so now step change, right? Or it could be continuous improvement. You're making it happen. So if you make it happen, expect to see that dip, right? Even if you want it to happen. So it's more than just the value to spare as far as the leadership's concerned. It's also more than the value to spare as far as people concerned. Now, the other possibility is change happens to you. It's nothing you have control over. Change happens to you. Now, that could be a positive change, right? Or it could be a negative change. Maybe someone comes in and says, you're going to be promoted. It's positive change. But if it happens to you, you don't have a lot of choice in it, you still have a learning curve and you still have a little anxiety with it, right? Or it could be a negative change. We're going to change your job. It's not going to be good. We're going to change it down a level, or we're going to fire you. It could be chaotic, and that's just that there's no rhyme or reason to it that you can see. It just happened, and there's things happening out there. Or it could be planned changes, plans from your customer, like we got to change everything we want from you. Or it could be employers, and that'd be an example we gave before. Or it could be employees. It could be all kinds of things, right? So these are things you don't necessarily have control over.